The panel format for LED lights have been a lot less popular since the hostile takeover by COBs, and that makes the introduction of the PL1 panels from iFootage all the more intriguing. What novelties can they possibly bring to the table in the familiar LED panel? Well, honestly, not too much, though it does do a couple of things uniquely better than your average LED panel. There are two variants for these 80-watt panels, the RGB version, which is the PL1 80C, and the ATBN is the bicolor version. They are both built in exactly the same way, same dimensions, and they even weigh the same. But between these two, it's actually the bicolor variant that features an unconventional setup for its LEDs. Now, typically, almost all bicolor LEDs would have two sets of diodes, cool white and warm white. The ATBN has those too, but in addition to that, lime and blue LEDs as well, so 4 sets of diodes. It's my first time seeing anything like this, and the explanation given by iFootage for setting the diodes up in this BLWW configuration, blue, lime, and 2 whites, is how it reduces that spike in the blue spectrum, which is an unwanted characteristic of most LED light sources. By suppressing that spike of blue, the output from the ATBN would then more closely resemble natural daylight we get from the sun, and that's also reflected in its high SSI score of 83 at 5500 Kelvin. For comparison's sake, the PL1 80C, which features a conventional RGB WW setup, has a slightly lower score of 75. The ATC, being RGB though, does still mean it offers a higher degree of control over its output compared to the BN. For example, in CCT mode, the ATC has the option of green-magenta tint adjustments. It also has a wider color temperature range, which can be expanded beyond what I imagine anyone would ever need, 1400 Kelvin to 20,000 Kelvin. Of course, it would also have more effects built in than a bicolor fixture. The ATBN gets 10 built-in effects, while the ATC gets 19. What I found rather impressive on both these lights is actually the way the hardware is designed. Both these lights are exceptional in terms of build quality. Sturdy metal yoke along with the lever-style lock on both models. This is still, for me, the most comfortable way to tilt any light. The same lever can be pulled back and repositioned. 3 ways to power these lights: AC adapter, 100-watt USB PD, or V-mount battery. When using AC house power, it's also been designed so that you can mount the power adapter brick onto the V plate on the back of the light, and that truly makes a huge difference in how tidy the overall setup is. With an optional USB-C to DMX adapter, these panels can be DMX compatible. Aside from a carrying case, it also ships with a front diffuser and barn doors. Now, this here is one of my favorite design elements. The way you attach and remove the diffuser or the barn doors is by releasing 2 locking tabs on the top of the light, which flips the spring-loaded panel up, allowing you to slide in or out the attachments. There's attention to another piece of detail here, which thoroughly upped my respect for the folks who designed this light. If you look at the bottom edge, where the slide-in diffuser meets the base, you'll see a tiny little switch which will engage once you've got the diffuser in. Now, this triggers a color temperature compensation for the diffuser because passing light through diffusion will actually change the color temperature slightly. For the case of these 2 lights, the diffusion warms the color up so the light shifts cooler to compensate once it detects the diffuser. I set the light to 3200 Kelvin and metered its CCT with no diffusion installed. The reading I got was 3269 Kelvin. I then simply held the diffuser in front of the light, so this way it doesn't trigger the compensation, and the color temperature now reads warmer at 3110 Kelvin. Finally, I installed the diffusion as designed, the light compensates for it, and I get a reading of 3203 Kelvin. So it's not exactly perfect, but it has certainly reduced the Kelvin discrepancy from a difference of 159 Kelvin down to just 66 Kelvin. Now, with the diffuser attached, I metered both lights with my Sekonic C700 across their CCT ranges, and these were the results. I should note that the diffuser does knock the output down by about a stop and a third, so if it's maximum brightness you need, it makes sense to remove the diffuser. I do find it slightly unfortunate, however, that the diffusion does not blend all the individual LED groups into a perfectly uniform plane of light. If they made the standoff between light and diffusion slightly thicker, it would have been sufficient to achieve that. But at least in its current state, it still does a good enough job to not give you the dreaded stacked shadows, but reflections of the light source will still appear beady. Both the lines feature dual fans for cooling, and while they're not exactly loud, they can be quite audible because it's more of a high-frequency whining sound. There are controls that allow you to set the fan mode to quiet and ultra quiet. Now, in these modes, the fan noise is greatly reduced. In fact, I noticed that the fans were completely off in ultra quiet mode. The trade-off is your maximum output is limited to 70% in quiet mode and 50% in ultra quiet mode. Now, these brightness levels are assuming your dimming curve is set to linear. These values will be adjusted accordingly if you're on any of the other dimming curves. Now, I'll end this review with one thing I don't quite like about this light, and it's the display on the back of it. My primary issue with it is its viewing angle. It's very hard to read if you're off to the side. The response time of the display is also quite slow, and that can be a bit annoying if you're trying to cycle through values quickly. These can certainly be inconveniences, especially if the light is mounted out of reach. The redemption to that is the wireless operation via the iFootage Lumen app is pretty well done, so at least that can be a secondary solution. At $299 for the bicolor and $329 for the ATC, these are slightly above average in terms of pricing, but I think the price certainly reflects in their above average hardware as well as their quality of output. They're not completely without their shortcomings, but it's also impossible to not acknowledge how thoughtfully these two panels have been designed. For me, the PL1 panels have certainly fulfilled my curiosities for what an LED panel released in 2023 should be.